Well, first of all, Minnesotans should be pleased today that the hard decisions that have been made over the last several years are paying off. For the third November forecast in a row, our state budget is in surplus with a structural stability that we haven't seen previously in this century. And the economic disasters that Republicans predicted time and time and time again clearly haven't come to be. But the fact is, even with this good news in the budget forecast, too many ordinary Minnesotans are being left behind in an economy that continues to favor insiders and wealthy connected corporations. If you look at this budget forecast, you'll see that total wage and salary growth has slowed since February. Again, that's really important. Total wage and salary growth has actually slowed this year since the last election. And someone noted corporate income is going up faster and individual income is going down. And that should be telling us something about how our economy is working. Too many people feel like their lives are getting out of their control, and it's really no wonder that we see this anger out there. That's what this economy is doing to people. The budget forecast really is a true opportunity, I think, for us to hit the reset button on the really big missed opportunities of 2015. Opportunities we had to raise income and opportunity for ordinary Minnesotans and for small businesses, and to make sure that families and children are thriving and strong and supported. The true test of our leadership, I think, in this upcoming budget is whether we are willing to look in the eyes of those people who have been doing really well for a long time, well-connected, wealthy elites and big corporations who have seen their profits piling up, and say that it's time that that prosperity is shared with the rest of Minnesotans. If we do that, we will have a successful session. If we don't do that, it will once again be a failed session. The 2015 session just left too many Minnesotans feeling squeezed. And if you just look at the results of that session, if you look at tuition, at higher education, students this year are paying higher tuitions across the state of Minnesota and taking on more debt because the Republicans insisted on a budget that shortchanged them. And that is money out of those families' pockets, just like a tax increase would be. If you look at property taxes, you see and heard in the forecast review that property taxes are again going up relative to Minnesotans' income, something that had been turned around over the last 2 years. That's not the right direction for us to be going. They're going to go up over $400 million, in fact, a record amount, it's projected, despite big promises from the Republicans to the contrary. That, again, is money coming right out of people's pockets and squeezing middle-class families. And if you look at the tax bill that was actually passed, clearly the Republicans prioritized big corporations, owners of skyscrapers, as you've heard me say before, and mainly corporations that aren't even in the state of Minnesota. And the budget surplus that we see today, had that tax bill been passed, would be gone and we would be in a deficit. People need to remember that the tax bill that the Republicans proposed and passed last year would have left this state in a deficit today had it become law. Other money out of people's pockets. The Republicans passed a plan on Minnesota Care that is causing the healthcare costs of tens of thousands of Minnesotans to go up. Premiums are going up, out-of-pocket costs are going up for tens of thousands of Minnesotans, and that is only because of direct actions that the Republican budget took. Again, money coming out of their pockets. And no progress was made to help employees whose wages are stolen, whose family, who has a sick kid at home and can't take sick leave because they're afraid they're going to lose their job, and who aren't CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg that can afford to take 12 weeks off to stay home with their kids when they're born. We should have that for ordinary Minnesotans as well. As the governor noted, students and businesses without access to broadband across the state continue to be shortchanged because the House Republicans refuse to prioritize those investments. And of course, even though it was a transportation session, nothing was done to make our roads any safer, less congested. But what this budget report tells us, and the reason we should be hopeful, is that we can hit that reset button and create economic growth and rising income opportunity for those Minnesotans who do play by the rules and work hard, but still can't seem to get ahead, and that should be our laser focus as we make choices with this budget surplus, because that's what this budget surplus is about. It's all about choices. First of all, there is simply no reason we can't pass a transportation bill that provides dedicated, stable, and sufficient funding to solve the problem long-term for all parts of the state, including real investments in transits. And I just need to be very clear. The Republican bill that was on the table last year, first of all, it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up if you actually do the math. It doesn't fix the problem. It double counts in typical Republican fashion, money that they use. It uses funny money. It borrows from the future in exorbitant ways, typical Republican fashion, to try to solve a short-term problem. It relies on borrowing, and it takes away from education and healthcare and makes no investment whatsoever in transit. So that's the plan that they have on the table right now. That plan absolutely does not meet the requirements that the governor laid out, and it certainly does not meet the needs of the state of Minnesota going forward. So I look forward to seeing a transportation plan from them that's actually real and solves the problem. We should invest in our early learners and families to help narrow the achievement gap and reduce those really high child care costs, third highest in the nation in Minnesota for families. We need to properly fund teacher development and evaluation in the state of Minnesota to make sure that we have the very best and most prepared teachers in our classrooms. We should freeze or reduce tuition for higher education. Again, those tuitions went up in the last year. And act to relieve the high burden of debt on recent graduates. We have that opportunity. We should respond to those unique economic challenges in greater Minnesota. Now is the time to step up and say that broadband and workforce housing and those who care for our seniors in their homes are in fact a priority and not an afterthought. And a $100 million investment in broadband should be the benchmark against which this session is judged. There's no question about that. We should also use a substantial amount of the one-time money to make a serious, significant, and bold investment in research and development and entrepreneurship. If we are going to be an economy that continues to grow, we really have a historic opportunity right now and to make and solidify Minnesota's position in the innovation economy. And we can use one-time resources to do that, and I think it's an exciting opportunity for us. And we should pursue some tax relief for ordinary Minnesotans, things like the rural property tax relief, LGA, and child care tax credits, a long-term caregivers tax credit, things that will make a difference in the pocketbooks of ordinary Minnesotans. And above all, we should treat the racial and socioeconomic disparities that we see in our state as the emergency that it is, and commit real resources and make policy reforms that are proportionate to the urgency of that situation. Our state is simply not going to succeed in the decades to come if we don't act on those issues right now. So these are the kind of discussions that we are allowed right now by the balanced budget that we laid the foundations for over the last several years. And these are the kind of discussions that will set our state up for the future, rather than divisive and stale sloganeering about give it all back that is simply a cover for give it all back to the rich and connected special interests. And one more thing that I think it's important to emphasize. This kind of healthy discussion in the long term can only be possible if we do everything we can in 2016 to clean up and shed light on our campaign finance system and throw open the legislative process to make it more accountable to ordinary citizens rather than special interest. That needs to be a key topic of discussion in 2016, and we can start in two ways. First of all, there's discussion about a special session. If there is one, all the details of that special session should be worked out in public and not in a closed room with just a few people. And secondly, and I'm not sure I'm speaking necessarily for my Senate colleagues right now who are behind me, but we should also not simply drop a new tax deal and a new transportation bill into a conference committee that's sitting out there. We should have a real and legitimate public discussion going through the committee process to make sure that those tax and transportation bills actually reflect the needs of Minnesotans and that there is a public process. So I am optimistic with this budget forecast. It really gives us a chance to make real progress for ordinary Minnesotans. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the folks from the Senate.
Thanks, Paul. Just a couple of comments. I think the governor's comments were instructive. That I think we take some pride in affecting the structural stability of the state budget. From the Senate perspective in particular, I think as the governor and the commissioner emphasized, the fact that we have a budget reserve now that provides some stability if we have a future downturn And I think Rod and I can, uh, I don't know if this would be quite fair, taking some particular pride. We had more of an offhand conversation a couple of years ago about what to do with some of the surplus monies, and that was ultimately incorporated into Rod's tax bill that provided for this set-off for the budget reserve. And I think the governor emphasized, as did the commissioner, that we have then affected a structural stability that we have not seen for a number of years. And the governor's made it very clear that we need to maintain that and to do so not just for the next couple of years, but for the years to come. For all of us who have lived through the ups and downs of the recession and putting aside what the causation was or was not, but certainly the structural instability of the state budget and the inability to take care of what folks in the state expected is something that hopefully we've provided some reinforcement against. A couple of other thoughts relative to what's been laid out. The governor obviously has offered some cautionary notes, which I think are important to keep in mind. I think a particular aspect of this forecast should be noted, and that is that if you take a look at what we've attempted to do, what the governor's administration has done relative to healthcare in the state, the fact that we've provided, coupled with the federal government, an ability to take care of folks has now resulted in a diminishment of healthcare spending, so that the surplus is built not upon tax increases. The surplus is built upon some pretty smart management of the state budget. The other thing I would comment on is that some of what takes place obviously is beyond our control. Dr. Clemacaitis talked about the fact that we have such issues out there which are not just simply Minnesota issues, but the continued instability in the housing market, the fact that manufacturing is starting to have a downward trend suggests that, as the governor's emphasized, we need to be cautious in what we do and how we approach this. And I think as Leader Thiessen indicated, there's some very important issues we need to take care of in terms of early childhood, in terms of rural broadband, in terms of racial inequities. And I think we can do that in a reasonable way with a reasonable budget, but to make sure that we don't, as we budget for the 2016 session, we don't turn upside down what has been now the structural stability of Minnesota.
Thanks, Dick. And as I've listened to the discussion the last week or so about the tax bill, including discussions today, I sense a general optimism that there is going to be a tax bill this year. I concur with that. I think that we will be working toward a tax bill in this legislative session and hopefully get that accomplished. But as always, it's the issue of what's in there. We listened to the governor talk about ideas and things that he will want in a tax bill in order for him to sign it. Clearly, the House is going to have ideas about what should be in it that, if last year is an indication, somewhat disagree with what the Senate did. So I think that we are going to be working hard to accomplish the goal of a tax bill, but we again have to go through that ongoing negotiations of what's going to be in it. When you look at the forecast, there was a 0.2% increase in revenue. Seems to me that the most conservative approach to this would be to make smaller incremental changes, do more one-time expenditures as opposed to the large ongoing permanent tax changes proposed by the House. There are a number of ways that can be accomplished. There are shifts that can be repaid. We have precedents in Minnesota of using cash for bonding. That was done back in the better times of the 1900s, I think we could, or 1990s, we could look at that again. And then, of course, we potentially could use some of this as a one-time expenditure as part of a larger transportation plan. There are projects such as the corridors of commerce in rural Minnesota that could use one-time monies. There's bound to be some larger transportation projects that could use some one-time monies. So I think we'll have to work through those as we get to the session. Now, having said that, the Senate does have some modest proposals for ongoing tax reductions. We are proposing a tax credit for businesses and organizations that hire veterans. We think as we look across the state of Minnesota, there's definitely a need and area that could be addressed with a pretty robust tax credit for the young men and women that are coming back from service overseas and others areas to have a tax credit for as they get hired for future employment. We have a significant proposal with regard to property tax relief. We would hope that the House would take a real good long look at the proposal that the Senate has with regard to the statewide business property tax. We are proposing a reduction in that area, but we also have a rate change that would allow some of that reduction to spread on to residences and other properties. And then we have a proposal for the continued partnership that we have with our local governments through an LGA increase and a county program aid increase. So we'll look forward to going to work with the House and the governor and see what kind of compromises we're all willing to do. But I think we need to make sure that the priorities of the state, transportation, education, and some property tax relief are accomplished in what the Senate brings forward.
I would like to draw your attention in particular to one particular footnote to Minnesota's budget forecast, and that is the activity that is currently going on at the federal level. It looks like they are indeed going to have a transportation bill. It looks like they indeed are going to have an education bill that's going to have implications and ramifications on Minnesota's policies. And they're going to have, it looks like at this point, some $800 million in permanent, that is 10 years out at least, tax reductions. Those tax reductions are going to have an impact on Minnesota. We have in the past adopted them just like the feds have done on a yearly basis, on an annual basis. It does include a number of reductions and business taxes, but also it looks like that Speaker Ryan and the President and other congressional and Senate leadership are really looking at improving and enhancing the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. And that is something that in our deliberations we are going to take a hard look at. Minnesota, as you know, is indeed a conforming state. That doesn't mean that we adopt all the changes that are made that would have an impact on Minnesota without thoroughly vetting them and understanding what the impacts are going to have on Minnesota. So I would encourage everyone to be looking at the actions that are going to take place at the federal level before the end of the year, because indeed they will have an impact on our discussions, whether in new bills or in the current conference committee about the resulting tax bill that we're going to present to the legislature and to the governor for his signature. So I certainly will hope that you'll stay alerted to the activity at the federal level and its impact on Minnesota. And I think our leaders are ready for questions.
Representative Thiessen, will your caucus propose a gas tax increase this year, or do you agree with the governor that that idea is dead?
I want to see what the Republicans come up with. Their bill doesn't work, and we'll have to see how they fill in that gap. But they clearly have rejected a gas tax increase, so I want to see what their numbers are.
Do you reject it, or do you think that would be a reasonable proposal?
I think we want to see now what the Republicans have said. The Democrats had a proposal on the table last year, so we'll see what the Republicans can come up with.
Chairman Skoy, from your perspective, what do you think would be the best way of providing additional money for roads and bridges in Minnesota?
Well, the Senate voted for gas tax revenues. You know, I think there's many ways to skin a cat, but if you're not putting some new money into this, you're probably not making very much progress. I would think that the traditional pay-as-you-go mechanism that Minnesota has traditionally used, to have a gas tax and then use it for your roads and bridges, is the best mechanism to use. We'll look at other ones, but whatever we do, I think it would have to be dedicated to roads and bridges and transportation needs.
Well, is your caucus going to hold firm on that gas tax vote, or is there room to move do you see it in order to get something done, which is what the governor wants?
Well, I'm only speaking for myself, but my impression is that there was a lot of support for permanent transportation funding. I think as you look across the state, and there's a lot of conversations about rural and urban, et cetera. It's important for the urban areas to have good transportation so people aren't sitting on the freeways waiting to get to work and waiting to get home to work. But it's important for rural Minnesota, as we have our farm-to-market road system, that most of the products that are produced in rural Minnesota travel on. Whether you're a farmer, or Marvin Windows, or Arctic Cat, or other small manufacturing facilities, your products are traveling in a truck on a road. And it's really important for us. So we're going to put some resources into this important infrastructure for the state of Minnesota. And I don't want to draw lines in the sand or anything like that, but for me, the best mechanism is the one that we've used in the past, which is pay-as-you-go with a gas tax.
While you're up there, somebody mentioned LGA, Coalition Greater Minnesota Cities suggests $45.5 million, I think, to bring it back to 2002 levels. Is that something you think the Senate would support?
Our bill that's in conference, or could be if the conference committee is reconvened, brought the LGA level back to the 2003 level, I believe.
2003.
I think that's the timeline.
Do you think this conference committee will be reconstituted, or as your colleague in the House wants, can start over?
Above my pay grade.
Didn't know anything was that high.
Representative Thiessen, I have a question for you. What did you mean when you said that it's possible to use one-time money to solidify Minnesota's position in the research economy?
Well, if you look at other places around the state, they are making investments to help fund basic research, to help fund translational research, turning basic research into commercialized products. I think the state can step in there and work with the private sector with a fund of money that could move us in that direction and actually jump us ahead of a lot of other states.
Would that be money to the University of Minnesota or separate from that?
Money to the University of Minnesota and to other research institutions around the state.
You folks have talked about, especially you, Mr. Leader, quite a few things that you'd like to see done. There's not a lot of time, as you might know, in this coming session, and some of the big issues like transportation will probably involve a lot of the discussion. How far down the list can you go with some of your wishes?
Well, I think that we proved in 2013 and 14 that you can get a lot done for the state of Minnesota. And I would expect that legislators are going to come ready to get to work and that we should be thinking about things right now. I think we can get a lot done. I think we should be ambitious for our state. All right, thank you. Do you want to say anything, Aaron, about early childhood?
So, I've been about the state talking with Minnesotans, teachers, superintendents, principals, et cetera, about early childhood, and I will tell you that Minnesotans are extraordinary people. And as we think about this next session, we should be thinking each day about the way that they are leading their lives and the struggles that they are facing to make ends meet. And with this surplus, it makes no sense to me that we would reject an investment in early learning for our youngest learners, because we know we can change the trajectory of their lives, and we know that we can change the trajectory for the future of our state. And so there are a lot of things to consider and not much time, but we've already done a lot of work on early learning and universal pre-K, and there's not one reason not to do that for our youngest learners this session.
Thank you.